All right, Zoom people, you can see just the title slide, right?
Yes, we can.
Okay. All right, hey everybody. So thanks for making it in today or being here on Zoom. Just a couple things I want to reiterate from lab yesterday. So your topics for your presentation, that first idea you might have, a paragraph about it, that's on the syllabus that's still up on Moodle because I didn't fix it last night. It says this Thursday, but like I said in lab yesterday, it's gonna be next week. Same, and we have our exam next week, and I will also be putting up sort of my like little list of like clades and snapemorphies and stuff on Moodle today too, for you guys for the exam. Any questions about that stuff? Just wanted to say it out loud. Yeah.
Could you give us a review of the prompt for that project again?
Yeah, and the slides are all on Moodle, so you could look at them too. But yeah, I will put that out there. For you guys to kind of let yourselves think. I know some of you have been talking a lot or thinking a lot about what you're going to do. Some of you have come and talked to me about it, which is great. That's on Moodle on the slide, then I can send a little note to remind you. So I'm kind of going fast today to start because we are a little bit behind, and it's really important to me that we get through birds on Thursday so that for next week we've finished all the biodiversity lectures. And so we didn't quite finish mammals. So this was not the slide I would have used, but like there's a hippopotamus with some of the reptiles we'll hopefully get to today because we haven't talked about hippopotamuses yet. We haven't talked about turtles yet. So this will be what we're doing today. So if you guys remember on Thursday last week over Zoom, when I was in Seattle, we were in the middle of the UR Contemplaries. We had done all 4 orders that aren't primates, and we had almost totally done primates. We had left off just kind of in the very middle of talking about humans. So I've made some cuts to what we're actually going to talk about. But one of the things that's really important to me in this anatomy class is that you guys understand so much about where our anatomy, where your bodies come from. And so the slide we left off on Thursday was this one, showing you guys where the human fossil record, and when I say human fossil record, I mean fossils of organisms that are more closely related to us than they are to any other thing. So chimpanzees and bonobos are our closest living relatives. These are where the fossils come from for every single thing early that is on our side of the tree, as opposed to being close to chimps and bonobos. And so what's so cool about this, just sort of, I think in a very factual way, is 150 years ago, this wasn't very clear. Now you guys live in a world where like every single solitary early human kind of thing fossil comes from Africa. And so the context for human evolution is very well grounded in like semi-arid grassland, light forests of sub-Saharan Africa. That's like a thing we know and can talk about. That's really cool. There's great fossils from Asia and Europe and the Americas from this time. The human stuff is all Africa. I just think that's incredible. This is a timeline, 0 million years ago on the right, 7 million years ago on the left. Our split from chimps and bonobos is somewhere around 7 or 8 million years ago. And then what you're seeing in all these colorful bars is a loose kind of phylogeny. Anthropologists, or the people who study these animals for the most part, sometimes they're a little reticent to use phylogeny. Of all the different fossils, different species, you guys can see genus and species up here, of different kinds of humans. There's us. Our species is Homo sapiens, about a 200 to 300,000 year old lineage. That's where we are in space and time. You and I are the only species of human left on the planet, but every single thing on this slide is closer to us than it is to a chimp or a bonobo or anything else. So this is the human fossil record going back about 7 million years. I want you to please talk to your neighbors about this. A lot of times students haven't seen something like this before. You can see how long these bars are. Some of these are long-lived species. Some of them are very short-lived species, as far as we know right now. So go ahead and talk to your neighbors just for a second about the human fossil record and make some observations, please. And anybody on Zoom, please use the chat for this. Can I get some observations here?
I like the question mark on the yellow one.
Yes, I do too. Because sometimes there's like Australopithecus africanus being related to Sediba, to Paranthropus, to this species of Homo. you know, there's all these lines here. So, this is like kind of an older diagram, I want to say. I like the uncertainty because a lot of this, the truth is that like there's 20 some species of human fossil named, but in reality, I'm sure we've named fossils where like that's one lineage through time. Do you know what I mean? Instead of like there's this thing that turns into this thing, turns into this thing in like a new species, new genus kind of way. It's like probably the same lineage. And so I like when there's honesty, where like Kenyanthropus is a very weird animal, very weird person, if you want to say that. And yeah, I don't know where to put it exactly. Or these, the Bertali species, that one hasn't been named yet, but it's different, right? That's cool. Anything else? Yeah,
Could you talk really quickly about some of the species that were concurrent with people?
people meaning you, Homo sapiens.
Modern.
Yeah, that's what's cool, right? So there's Homo neanderthals. You guys might know anybody here who is not of like Central or Eastern or Southern African descent. You have Neanderthal DNA in your body. Are Homo sapiens interbred with Neanderthals in what's now the Middle East and Europe? So this is a thing that when we find the fossils of Neanderthals, we can recognize them as different. That's why they have a name. They have a different kind of humerus, a different kind of skull. But we have the genome of Neanderthals now, and anybody who's, like I said, of non-Sub-Saharan African descent, you have some mitochondrial or genetic pieces from Neanderthals. It's more than mitochondria, it's nuclear. So we interbred with Neanderthals, so we obviously weren't that different from them. The craziest moment, to get at your question, I think, in all of human evolutionary lineage time is about 1.9 million years ago in places like Kenya or Mozambique or South Africa. There's 6 different species that are concurrent. Like we recognize their fossils as different, but there's 6. That's very wild, and I hope challenges any idea I think a lot of people have of like monkey becomes chimp, becomes caveman, becomes person. Because if there's 6 different species all at the same time, they're not a lineage that turns into us. It's its own thing. So the only thing I want to make you guys see here is that there's a lot of human biodiversity. If this was a paleo class, or actually if you're in the evolution class, I talk about this a lot more, Dr. Turner or Dr. Thomas's evolution class. We don't have time, but we could talk about it if you guys want to late in the semester. So there's human biodiversity. There's tons of different ecologies of these organisms. They are not all like you and I. Some of them are arboreal, like they live in trees still. Pretty cool. And it's non-linear. There's very different paths. The Paranthropus up there, the light blue, those are people that are like basically like the human gorillas. They've got really wide faces, really enormous teeth. They are like eating hard things like nuts and stuff like that. Their whole ecology is different. Some of them might even be grass eating out on the savannas. Totally not. They don't become us at all. They're their own thing. But they're still human related. Very, very cool. This is a phylogeny, a little cleaner than what you just saw, but with less species level information, kind of showing you the relationships and a couple bits of like the body size, stance, and skull shape of the different human kinds of organisms. And because we're just late, I just really can't give this the time I would love to. Like I said, take evolution, or we can talk about this at the end of the semester, maybe. Some of the cool patterns we see in human evolution, but because we have such a rich fossil record, we know a lot about the anatomical changes that have happened to lead to the bodies you and I are now sitting or standing in. One of my favorites is this really old question in human evolution was about our brain size and our bipedality, our walking on 2 legs. Those are 2 of the most obvious things that set us apart from so many other vertebrates. And what's really cool is this is a graph millions of years ago, 3.5. And then cranial capacity. So it's just like the volume of water you could put into a skull if you held it upside down, right? And how much the brain space is. It's nothing about brain anatomy, it's just the volume in the brain. And so you can see that there's an upswing towards us, but that upswing is in the last million years or so. Most of the animals on this phylogeny have a brain size that's like pretty similar to chimpanzees and bonobos, maybe a little bit bigger. But then there's a real upswing in the last million years. What's very cool about that is that we have these skeletons. And so there's simple things that like 50 years ago weren't clear that are now very clear. So for instance, we are walking around on 2 legs before our brains get big. So, you know, if you guys go back decades in the literature, you'll find people talking about ideas like, oh, well, our brains got bigger and then we saw opportunity in the grasslands, then we adapted to grasslands. Nope. There's a chimpanzee kind of thing that's like us. Our ancestor walking around in the grasslands like this before anybody gets like an enlarged brain and gets our kind of sapiens. That's just very cool. These like kind of these like simple facts that are really awesome and let us like get a tangible record of history. Any questions about this? I bet there's a million, but You could definitely ask them if you want, but I'm gonna try to go. All right. The last clade of placental mammals is probably the one that has like half of anybody who wrote a mammal as their favorite animal, usually they're talking about a Laurasiathere at the beginning of class. So Laurasiatheres are beasts, Theria is beast, and Laurasia is the northern continents, Europe, North America, Asia. This is a clade that originated in the northern continents and have been there for the last 60 million years. They've of course spread into places like Africa and South America and even Australia. So they've spread, but they started in the north, and there's 6 orders in the Laurasiatheres. Let's talk about them. Here's the Eulippotyphlins. Take a minute, talk to your neighbors. What do you recognize? What do you not recognize among these almost 500 little mammals? Thanks, Alyssa. All right, so on the chat, Alyssa said elongated noses. There are a few elongated noses. In fact, Eulippotyphlins have a special cartilage off their nasal bones, off their premaxillae, that has a movable, smelly, good smelling nose. And so that's a great observation. That's absolutely a feature of this clade. This clade used to be called insectivora because they're all insectivorous. But what's amazing is before we had molecular phylogenetics where we could use DNA to infer relationships, things that you guys have already seen, like those tenrecs, like the golden mole, elephant shrews, back with those that you guys saw those with the afrotheres. A lot of these were all put together in this big pile called insectivora. We now know that's not true. These animals are their own thing. They have their own adaptations to the modern world, but a lot of times they give us a really good insight into the probable ecologies of like early mammals, the ancestral placental mammal. Because during dinosaur times, most mammals look kind of like a possum or kind of like a shrew or kind of like a squirrel maybe. So these small mammals are really giving us important insight into mammal evolution. And the thing I like to remind you guys of is like there's whatever 5,000 some kinds of mammal, and most of them are like this big or small. All the rodents are mostly small. These guys, very diverse, pretty small. Any other things people noticed or want to talk about? Yeah, they kind of look like rodents because they're small and furry, but they're totally nothing like them. Rodents have very specialized teeth, those ever-growing incisors. Rodents have tons of snape morphies that make them very much different from these, but they are small and fuzzy. If you saw a shrew and a mouse run across your living room at the same time, you probably wouldn't know which one was which, maybe. This is the true mole. Look at that big hand. Almost no eyes, and some of them truly no eyes. So you guys have seen golden moles, marsupial moles. These are real moles. All 3 of those organisms evolved a completely independently, a like burrowing for bugs body plan. Hedgehogs have spikes on their back, completely different from tenrecs, echidnas, porcupines. It's still derived hair to make a quill, totally independently evolved, totally different structure. Solenodonts are in the Caribbean. These are some of the only venomous mammals. They have some venom that they secrete in their saliva, so when they bite you, you get a little bite, but they don't really bite you, don't worry. But they're very endangered. We'll talk more about some of these animals later. The Eulippotyphlins, everybody. Now the second most speciose order of mammals after rodents. Talk to each other about bats for a second. The only flying mammals, truly. So I'm hearing a lot of people talking about, there's a lot of noses, snout shapes. Many of you probably know that some bats, actually most bats actually, echolocate. They make a noise and then they receive that noise. And so a lot of times the nose is part of how they make the noise, and then the ears is how they receive the noise. Sometimes the nose is actually also part of the receiving of the noise. They make a noise that bounces off the moth, and then the moth Bat knows where the moth is at night. So these are the only flying mammals. Many, many, many mammals have evolved gliding. Bats are the only truly flying mammals. There's a lot of really interesting biology there we can talk about. They stretch skin between their fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They have all 5 fingers just like you. Here's a vampire bat with a big old thumb. And so they walk like that, but then the other fingers are all folded up, supporting skin, 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 and then skin like this, which is very cool. Bats are very social sometimes. Obviously, there's big bats like fruit bats that look they're called flying foxes sometimes because their faces just look like pretty normal mammally. These ones do not echolocate. Their faces are kind of normal. Very cool, very interesting. There's tons of great ecology in bats. This is 1,400 species of them. You can imagine they do all kinds of stuff. If you don't know anything about vampire bats, look into it. But bats are really great. Anybody else have anything else they want to say about bats?
I didn't know bats fish.
Yeah, that bat trawls with its feet, like minnows and stuff on the surface. It'll just fly and go like this. And if it gets lucky, there's a fish and pulls them up. Yeah, there's also frog-eating bats. I encourage you to look it up. They fly really low in the rainforest and they wait for some frog to be like beep, 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 and then they grit it. So there's some really, depending on your opinion, atrocious photos of like a frog who cannot see because it's pitch black and it's just like its throat's going because it's singing and there's like a bat mouth like about to totally get its head. There's a lot of photos of it because people put camera traps to study the bats. And so there's a lot of frogs that are like that close from death in photos online. Check them out. It's very fun. Vampire bats are truly blood eaters. I will say this, they do sneak up on livestock and things like that. They make a little nick with their teeth and then they lap up the blood. They have anticoagulants in their spit so that the little wound doesn't heal, just keeps bleeding. And so they'll just drink from a cow or from a tapir or from whoever all night long. It's really fun. And they're very good on the ground. They can run to chase after stuff. Those are the true vampires. They are real. All right, here's the next order of Eularesia theors. These are called pangolins. Go ahead and talk about pangolins. The lion is not a pangolin.
Well, you can show me who does the travels.
Is anybody seeing a pangolin for the first time right now? That's very cool. Savannah says yes. Good. Honestly, yes. No, that's great. I love that. It makes me so happy. This is why I do this. It's very easy to talk about, like, let's just get into cats because the cats are so much stuff to talk about. Like, no, I feel like people should know about pangolins. So these have keratinous scales, like your fingernails, that cover their body, not their whole body, just their back. You can see the inside of the leg and the tummy and the chest and the mouth are not covered with these scales. So this is a completely independent evolution of something like armor. But these are, like I said, are like really heavy duty scales. There's not bones in there. Armadillos, which we've already talked about, absolutely have like a bony armor. This is not bone, it is keratin based. Some pangolins in Southeast Asia are tree climbers. They live up in the trees, so kind of like some of the weirdo climbing anteaters. They're in South America, except these are in Southeast Asia. But a lot of the pangolins on the ground in Africa and places like India are very heavily armored. When they want to, they walk bipedally, which is extremely cool. They give you a little bit of like a dinosaur vibe because they're up on 2 legs with a really long tail. You can see they have a lot of anteater specializations. Really small mouth, really long tongue, and they bust open like termite mounds and stuff to get after insects. And so again, not only do they have their armor really interestingly, but you guys have now seen anteaters and armadillos. You've seen the aardvark, you've seen the echidna. There's a bunch of different animals on different continents, different mammals that have evolved this ant-eating morphotype. Big claws, buff arms, long skinny face, long tongue. Totally did it on their own. Convergent evolution again and again and again on different continents. Super awesome. Pangolins, I'll just say, last thing about pangolins is they're like very super endangered because they get captured a lot in the wild and people grind up their scales for, you know, whatever medicine and stuff like that. That isn't really medicine. It's a real bummer. So these are all pretty critically endangered, except for like 2 or 3 of them.
How big can they get?
I think the biggest pangolins are like this. They're not humongo. Yeah. I'll tell you, ask me sometime when I don't have too much to show you guys, and I'll tell you some cool penguin stuff. Even more cool penguin stuff. Here's probably humans' favorite order of mammals that isn't primates, isn't other humans. People love their carnivorans. So there's almost 300 species of carnivorans. You guys know a lot of these animals already because they're cheap and popular. But go ahead and look at this. There's basically the dog side of the tree and the cat side of the tree. And those are all mixed up on here, but that's how we can break it down. Maybe we'll get into it a little bit later. So go ahead and talk to each other about carnivorans. I know you guys know these animals very well.
Okay, so.
That is a coati. So it's Central American, but they make it up in Arizona and New Mexico sometimes. Coatis. Asking about this coati. There's only like, I think 6, 7 species in the raccoon family, and only the raccoon looks like the raccoon. Everybody else looks very different. So I'm gonna say that there's like too much to say about this slide just generally, but like, why don't you guys like share anything you want about any of this?
There's like the dog side and the cat side, and I was like, how are you supposed to differentiate the two? And then it's like, is it bendy?
Is it bendy or not? I'll tell you this, there are, those top 4 are all on the cat side and everybody else is on the dog side. So there's plenty of weasels and otters though that are pretty bendy, but they're on the dog side. A couple skunks that are pretty bendy, but the dog side of the things, this is all dog side.
So hyenas are on the cat side.
Hyenas are, yeah, cat relatives. Yep. And that is even a weird hyena. That's an ant-eating hyena. That's not even like a bone-crushing hyena. That hyena has almost no teeth and a really long tongue. Seals, sea lions, and walruses used to be their own order because obviously they're so different. They're adapted to like the oceans, but they fit deep within. Guess who's their sister? Bears. It's pretty fun. This is one of the biggest groups in this clade. So all the badgers, all the otters, there's tons of species of weasel, ermines, minks. This is a wolverine. This wolverine here representing a lot of different animals. The red panda is all by itself, single species in its family. You guys can debate if you like that I use the fennec fox to represent all dogs or not. But all the wolves and dingoes and cool things are being represented by that little fox.
You know about
Mongoose, there you go. Well, what's it doing in the picture? Getting after a snake. So mongoose, you guys probably know a lot about mongoose too. I mean, they're all over the old world. So Africa and Asia mostly. Super diverse. They do a lot of the stuff that weasels do in the Americas and in Europe. A lot of mongoose are really good snake specialists. That's why I put that picture up there. Funnily enough, though, the honey badger, who you guys probably know what the honey badger does, is part of this group. The other mongoose thing I'll say is you guys, the most famous mongoose easily is meerkats, the ones that are social and live together. Timon is a mongoose. I'm also not 100% sure that the plural of mongoose is mongoose, but I say that. All right, too much time here, so we got to go on. The next order of placental mammals are the odd-toed ungulates. Things like horses, lots of species of horses, donkeys and zebras are part of that group. Rhinoceroses and tapirs. Anybody hasn't seen a tapir before? Tapirs are forest dwellers, but they're still in South America and Southeast Asia. They are distributed all over the place. Tapirs have those nice long noses sniffing around, but really good, really intense herbivorous teeth. You can think of it as like these animals evolved in the jungles during early mammal evolution after the dinosaurs went extinct. Tapirs never left the forest, whereas rhinos and horses have adapted to like the deserts and grasslands of the world. Rhinos used to be much, much more diverse than they are now, and they used to be on a lot of continents. We have rhino fossils from Idaho, but North America loses our rhinos like 3-4 million years ago, or 4-5 million years ago, which really, I think, sucks. So now rhinos are all in Asia and Africa. Used to be all over Europe too. And then horses. You guys know horses. Anything to say about these? Okay, these will come up. The last group of placental mammals, dare I say, maybe my favorite. I don't know. These are the artiodactyls, the even-hoofed mammals. This is a monophyletic group. Talk about this for a second and let it in.
Oh, I didn't like 2 feet.
Right.
All right, what are some thoughts about artiodactyl? Super diverse. Yeah, so there's like, there's manatees and dugongs, there's sea otters, there's all the seals and walruses and stuff like that. Some people will count like the polar bear, but then yes, almost all your marine mammals are going to be this clade called cetacea. So these are cetaceans, of course, and these are cetaceans, of course. We'll talk about that.
Sure, it's just like one, just like you're talking about.
We're going to talk about it later in class, but I think the best thing you guys can know is that like the story of whale evolution and where whales go is only very recently like fully figured out, and it's really spectacular. Part of it's genetic, but a part of it's fossil. There are plenty of early whale fossils now that have their hooves, which is the best, because that's where the molecular data would suggest they go, and then you find the fossils and it's got little hooves on its flippers. It's fantastic. So obviously this is very derived, and it's hard to imagine these two as relatively close to each other, but indeed they are. Also, lots of other famous things, a lot of very rare things. So chevrotains, musk deer, pronghorn, not very diverse. Those two don't live on this continent. You can see they have saber teeth. Fun. And pronghorn, you guys know, Idaho has this animal. This is, again, an animal all by itself in its own family, part of a much bigger group of animals that's now mostly extinct. Pronghorn's sister, just if you care, are giraffes, which is great. All right, that is your artiodactyls. Don't worry, we'll talk about them a lot more. So here's your full mammal tree. So this orca is representing giraffes and camels too, to be clear. Sorry. So there's your mammal tree. Blah, 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 blah. All right. Now let's do what we're supposed to do today. Actually get into reptiles. So mammals are 1/2 of amniotes. You guys learned some amniote characters, skull fenestration, the amniotic egg. Those are features that unite the mammals with the last big group of organisms we have to talk about, which are the reptiles. And so there's the phylogeny again. You got your tetrapods, your amniotes, and then within amniotes, the reptiles and the mammals. We're going reptiles today. We will see how we do. We have 45 minutes. I'm going to give you one character for reptilia. All of these animals inherit this character. Some of them have modified it quite a bit, so you don't see it on them anymore, but we can see it in fossils and in their development sometimes. And that is indeed the diapsid skull fenestration. So if you remember, a character I gave you for amniota is skull fenestration. So just a place where your jaw muscles to attach to your skull in some expanded way. Not in one simple place, but there's like a big surface to attach onto. So amniotes, all of them have some kind of skull fenestration. You guys as mammals have single holes. Reptiles all have two holes, this diapsid condition. So there is an upper temporal fenestra behind the eyeball and a lower temporal fenestra behind the eyeball. And so this has been modified in a lot of living reptile groups, but the ancestral condition is this two-hole split for different jaw muscles to attach and allow a very powerful closing of the jaw. So that's the character I want you to have for reptiles. Yeah.
Are trolls kind of weird?
Yes, absolutely correct. We'll talk about it. So here's your extant reptilian diversity. Over 10,000 species of this big clade called squamates. That includes snakes. That's why there's an awful picture of a garter snake eating a lizard, because those are both squamates. Crocodiles, only 25 species. Turtles, 360 some species. And there's one species of this reptile called a sphenodon or a tuatara. Tuatara is the Maori word. It's from New Zealand only. There is of course one other group of reptiles, which absolutely goes right there. That is the birds. So all reptile diversity includes 20,000 some things, really more than 21,000 things. And almost all that is lizard, snakes, and birds. The rest of the clades are not as diverse, although they are, of course, evolutionarily really important. So there's your living reptile diversity. Today, we're going to try to get through a few different pieces of it. So this is the reptile tree we'll use for the rest of today, and we'll use it on Thursday too, just to give you guys a general layout of reptiles. I'll let you look at this for a second while I walk around the room. You can pretend those aren't grayed out on the right. This is within reptiles, the evolutionary relationships. Okay, we're going to take our first left. So reptiles is split into lepidosaurs, and these animals we can broadly call archosaurs. We're going to the lepidosaur side today. And so this clade here is called Lepidosauria. It is a clade that encompasses about half of all the living reptiles, all the snakes and lizards, and then that weirdo, the tuatara, are all lepidosaurs. I'm going to give you one character for Lepidosauria, although there are many, many I could give you. The one, oh no, sorry, I guess I'm giving you two. And oh, of course I'm giving you two. I can't believe I forgot. The first is a transverse cloaca. And so these animals have a single, just like you saw in platypuses and echidnas. Platypuses and echidnas retained a cloaca, and these reptiles also retain a cloaca. But in lepidosaurs, the cloaca is transverse. There is a slit behind the pelvis. So this is the underside of two lizards that someone's holding in their hand. And there's a slit that's transverse. It goes across the body axis, cloaca. So if you don't remember, a cloaca is the single opening through which like digestive, urinary, and reproductive things happen. All the same. Now inside there's more holes, but on the outside, there's just one. And that hole is transverse. The reason I showed, that's just like a thing that you can use to recognize them. And then the other feature I want to give you applies only to male lepidosaurs, and it is the hemipenes. Every single lepidosaur male has two penises, a left penis and a right penis. Both are fully functional and fully developed, but what is interesting is that they only really use one. So when they mate, you can imagine the tail is kind of like right there in the way. And so they usually have to do some fancy geometry to have internal fertilization. And I didn't know this actually until very recently, that male lizards, male snakes, male tuataras, they usually only use one. So they're actually called in the literature like right penis or left penis, even though they have two. If you can't enjoy that, I don't know what to say. I think it's great. So there's a snake's penises. Sorry if you've never seen it before. And there's a lizard's double penises action, if you've seen it before. I bet that snake penis is not what you expected. All right, so the first thing we're going to, I bet it's true, it's Valentine's Day. Look at those points. That's right. All right, so the first lepidosaur we're going to talk about is this one all by itself, the tuatara, also known as Sphenodon punctatus. Sphenodon is only in New Zealand. This is a thing that if you looked at it for 2 seconds, you would say, that's a lizard. It does look a lot like lizards. A lot of its similarities with what you would call lizards are plesiomorphies, inherited similarities, not derived features. Its sprawling body plan, its skin, kind of like, general look is inherited from the reptile common ancestor. And lizards, of course, also retain it. Awesome kind of armor and spikes. The word for it in Maori is tuatara, which means spine back or many spines or something like that. I don't remember. And so this only lives in New Zealand. They were all over New Zealand, but the Maori peoples and the first peoples to arrive in New Zealand was only about 1,500 years ago. And eventually rats came with people to New Zealand. And so now the tuatara is extinct on the mainland and only lives on little islands off the coast of New Zealand, but it's very well conserved. It lives in burrows with like seabirds. That one right there is eating a little bird, which is very cool. So they mostly eat bugs and stuff like that, but they are capable of carnivory. You can see they got some pretty gnarly teeth. So they can get to be about 2 feet long. The thing that I think is cool as a paleontologist is that this is the only species of a group of reptiles that's been around for over 200 million years. Really amazing fossils of animals in this lineage from like the exact same rocks that like early dinosaurs come from. So this thing's all by itself. And it has a 200 million year lineage that goes back with to where it connects with any other living group of reptile. So this thing's very, very, very cool. It's on the lizard snake side of reptiles, but it's its own thing that whole time. Anything? Okay. Now, this is one of the most important clades of vertebrates because it's so speciose. You guys saw it on that first big pie chart of all the vertebrate diversity really early in the class. This is technically an order, which shows you how funny humans are in naming things. Aardvarks get their own order, pangolins get their own order, squamates is an order, and it has 10,000 species in it. Squamates are all the lizards and all the snakes. Can you guys talk to each other about lizards and snakes and phylogeny? And talk to me about those relationships, please. Take a minute to look at that.
I won't use snakes or just.
All right, can I get some observations here about the phylogeny of snakes and lizards?
Chameleons are just like doing their own thing. They're not geckos.
Yeah, geckos. Geckos are sister to all the other squamates on this slide. That's true. Well, there's another group I could have put there too. But you'll see it in a second. What else?
We also discussed like snakes must have a common ancestor without limbs because it didn't independently evolve from this phylogeny.
So you could, there's a python and a cobra up there. Not that you had to know what those are, they're just 2 snakes. So snakes are a monophyletic group of reptiles. Tell me about lizards, please. Yeah, they're paraphyletic. Some lizards are closer to snakes than they are to other lizards. If you have a chameleon and a cobra and a gecko, the chameleon and the cobra share a more recent common ancestor than either one does with the gecko. That lizard body plan, sprawling, 4 legs, 5 toes, 5 fingers, all this basic stuff, that's the inherited tetrapod condition. Salamanders and lizards and crocodiles are all inheriting this. It's very cool to know that. So some lizards are closer to snakes than others. Lizard is a very handy word, just like reptiles without the bird is also a very handy word, but evolutionarily, it's important for you guys to know that some lizards are closer to snakes than others. I'm going to give you one character that unites all squamates. That character is called streptostyle. I didn't hold back this time. I only can give you skull mobility so many times. I'm giving you streptostyle. And so if you look at the top of the slide here, there's a tuatara skull in left lateral view, and then a chameleon, a gecko, and a viper. So the bone on the skull that forms the jaw joint in reptiles is called the quadrate. And in almost all amniotes, and certainly in something like the tuatara, the quadrate has a bony connection going forward towards like the eyeball with this bone called the quadratojugal, which connects to the jugal bone. And so that is a rigid structure at the back of the skull and the jaw attaches to it. All squamates have lost that lower bar underneath that lower temporal fenestra, and the quadrate can move in a little bit independent of like what's behind the eyeball. So that jaw can swing open a little farther. So that chameleon has a streptostylic quadrate, the gecko has a streptostylic quadrate, and the viper has an insane streptostylic quadrate. That jawbone, that jaw articulation bone of the skull can swing free of a lot of the rest of the skull. We're going to see this a lot when we get into like other parts of the class. It's called cranial kinesis, when there's movement within your skull. Mammals do not have very much cranial kinesis. Fishes and reptiles have tons of cranial kinesis. There's joints on the gecko skull, underneath the eye, on top of the skull roof, where the nose can flex independent of the brain, independent of the jaw. A lot of kinesis exists. Look at that. Well, you'll see in a second. A lot of kinesis exists within the reptile skull, and we're going to talk about that. Squamates, though, have this special condition of their quadrate called streptostyly. Snakes, of course, go buck wild with things like this. So we're going to talk about squamate diversity now. Again, I want to emphasize that I should have updated that. 10,100 species of squamate, and 35% or so, almost 4,000 species of that diversity are snakes. And so you can see that snakes back of its skull there flexed out as it's trying to successfully probably swallow that living lizard whole, which is very intense. So that's some squamate on squamate action right there.
They're not even like upset.
This is the problem. So there's some bias right there. So mammals have a lot of soft tissue on their faces and most other amniotes don't. And so that lizard cannot unfortunately express, I'm sure, the extreme distress it's feeling because it's got a bunch of scales attached to like skin and bone right there. So I'm guessing it's stressed, but you're right. If that was a mongoose or if that was a squirrel, you'd know it was freaking out. But that's a mammal snapomorphy I didn't give you. All right, the actual sister. So now we're into squamates. The actual sister to all of the other squamates that's still alive. The actual thing is this teeny little family. They're called dibamids. I can't not show them to you. I wonder what you will say.
I didn't even know there was another.
So this is sister to all the other squamates that are alive right now. Dibamids are little burrowers. You can see they have reduced eyeballs. Their scales overlap in such a way that they're very smooth. Up there, though, is where their transverse cloaca is. And on A, you can see there's these two little flaps, which are their very, 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 very reduced legs on the slit. So dibamids are just these little burrowing, almost legless organisms that are sister to all the other squamates. They have evolved a legless condition, a burrowing condition, all on their own. Okay, the next big group of squamates is 1,500 species in this big clade called Geckota. I'm going to talk about Geckotans for a minute. Observations or questions about geckos and other gecko-related things?
So that's what I was thinking.
Nope. There's a lineage of gecko that has lost its limbs. Legless geckos. Yep, they live in grasslands. I think they're Asian. I don't think they're African. I think they're all Asian. But I could be wrong. I'm sorry if I don't know. One thing I'll tell you guys is a lot of geckos don't have the ability to like blink. Their eyes are very big and they don't have like eyelids. So a lot of geckos have to like self-moisten with their tongues. Famously though, leopard geckos, which some of you might have as a pet, I know somebody who has them as a pet, these are called the eyelid geckos because they can't blink their eyes. Geckos are famous for their ability to climb like on walls and ceilings. See if you guys remember your chemistry. They have so much surface area on their toes, all these little lamellae, all these little layers. They have so much surface area on their toes that they literally can hold themselves on walls and ceilings using, see if you remember this, van der Waals forces. stick onto things. They're not actually sticky, they're not actually slimy. It's just so much surface area that they stick, which is insane. Obviously, not all geckos do that, so they don't have legs anymore. This is the one that tells you insurance. This is from Madagascar.
Is Oscar gecko pretty see-through? Is that like, or is that just the color?
It's a little translucent. It's a little translucent. That's a nocturnal one, so it's got really big eyes. So something a couple things as we go through squamate diversity, a couple things I want you guys to notice. The default ecology for things like lizards is something like insectivorous, and they might live in crazy different habitats, burrowing, desert, rainforest, but they're all like this, body size wise. And if they're like this, they almost certainly eat insects. Once you get a big lizard, it's either very much a carnivore or very much an herbivore. And that's just a very interesting pattern that we see again and again and again and again and again. There's a lot of evolutionary patterns that we can see in squamates, and they almost never happen once. They happen a lot of times. We're going to talk about some of those. I would encourage you to look for patterns. Please remember that these are all monophyletic clades. Every slide I'm going to give you is a monophyletic group. So if you see something that looks like something on another slide, it did it on its own. That's very cool. So these are geckos. Again, I just want to emphasize 1,500 species of geckos. You'll remember there's not 300 kinds of carnivorans. There's 1,500 kinds of geckos. All right. What about even more lizards? Skinks. Talk about skinks. That one lives in Idaho. So we have a skink here in Idaho, but not very many. Tell me about skinks. What are we talking about? What are we noticing? What about it? Just that we have them.
Seen it around.
You've seen it?
Yeah,
Oh, they're really hard to see.
growing up, we lived like around the state.
Yeah.
Had like little stick traps in our basement.
Oh,
They get caught all the time.
whoa. I mean, that's sad, but also really cool.
Yeah.
I've been looking for a skink the whole time I've lived here. I haven't seen them yet. Okay.
I'm not sure if it was mine, it was skink or not, but I remember seeing a lizard that looked like that with blue tail.
Yes.
Trying to
In
chase it.
Idaho?
It was in Colorado, like over on the western side.
Probably it is a skink, but there's some other guys that have blue situations.
Like that. But whatever it was, I remember like trying to chase after it, they were extremely fast, very good runners.
Yeah. What else? What other things?
You don't really see gurus come up in natural coloration.
Non-reptile coloration. There's a lot of blue fish, a lot of blue squamates, a lot of blue birds. Mammals are pretty like, I don't know, brown, red, orange. But you're right, blue itself is relatively rare in nature. There's a reason that tail's blue. It's so that the coyote or the hawk will grab the tail and then the lizard can be like, and get out of there. So that's an Australian skink here. These ones called blueies. They've got blue tongues, which is a threat defense. Google them if you want to. They're fantastic. They're pretty big. When they get scared or they want to scare something off, they like stick out their giant blue tongue and just like shake it all around. It's very upsetting to see, supposedly. What other observations do we make here?
There's more, lizards, lots of legs.
Grass lizards, limbless skinks. Also, those limbless skinks are burrowers with reduced eyes and shovel faces. So there's that. Armadillo lizards, pretty great. They bite their own tail to make a ball, which I think is great. A lot of cool defensive stuff. This is a really cool skink from like the South Pacific Islands. It lives up in trees and actually has a prehensile tail. It's also nocturnal. Really cool, really cool. Monkey-tailed skink. All right, thanks for looking at skinks for a minute. Some patterns. Let's talk about another group. These are called the true lizards, lacertoids.
Oh, well,
What jumps out to you immediately about this slide? The Mexican mole lizard is called bipes, which means 2 feet, which is dumb because it definitely has 2 hands. It has lost its legs, but it does have its forelimbs still. Otherwise, it's very, very, very long. It's a special kind of this thing. Amphisbaenians live all over the world. They are tropical or hot weather animals, really, for the most part. They're all burrowers. Some of them go deep. Some of them are in like the leaf litter. They're a lot like Sicilians. Again, sometimes almost complete loss of eyeballs. You can see the forked tongue though. We're getting up into the part of the tree where the tongue gets forked for like chemosensory. I know you guys know forked tongues for some animals. Maybe you don't think about amphisbaenians. So these are very weird, very fun. And so the Mexican mole lizard is one of those ones that like most people find truly unsettling and unpleasant, but it's a burrowing underground animal. So it's lost a lot of its coloration as that pink going on. We have whiptails in the very bottom of part of Idaho, the southern part of Idaho. Down into Utah, there's lots of whiptails. So we do have a lacertoid in our area. We're going to talk about tegus later in class. They have a bunch of very cool reproductive biology. They're South American. There's another very reduced limbed kind of lizard, those spectacled lizards. Look at those teeny little arms up there. Almost no legs at the back. If you want to talk about some like funny history of science stuff, that group of animals is called true lizards. And then this kind of bigger clade is the lizards. And the only reason that's true is because these are the lizards that are like naturally occurring in Southern Europe. And so the white people said lizards are this, and then it all goes there. So we're going to talk about like the history of science and how that kind of skews things. I just think this is a funny example. You're like, not an iguana or a chameleon? No, no, no. This weird clade are the lizards because they just were the ones that Linnaeus could see. Anyway, lacertoids. How about iguanians? Again, look at the numbers here, 1,700 kinds of this clade of lizard. So we're just blowing out all these mammal species numbers. Oh,
yeah. We're just like, yeah, we've got a stage, but there's got fast with it. I think we can.
All right, what are some iguanian things? What are some iguanian things you guys are noticing? Yeah. So Draco is one of the groups of lizards that glides. They are a gliding thing. They live in the forests of Southeast Asia. And yes, those are indeed extensions. They're not exactly the ribs, but they're extensions off of the ribs. So that thing doesn't have like a flying squirrel does, a skin thing between its wrist and its ankle. It jumps and then it's like has rib extensions. And then it glides.
We were talking about how this will have different mechanisms like looking horny or being bright colored.
There's a lot of color happening here. So we're talking about different, like being brightly colored, blending in, looking really hard to eat. I think this is really cool. So we have these here in Idaho and all over the American Southwest, horny toads, very short nose, big eyes, lots of spikes. These are great little lizards. But that up there is a moloch, which is an Australian iguanian, and it's completely on its own evolved like all the spikes and the short face. These and the moloch are independently evolved like ant specialists. They just sit there and they eat up ants. But again, that morphology, you're like, well, those must be related, and they are, but that inherited, that same spikiness is not a common ancestor thing. They've both done it. Here's our most famous, if you walk around in Idaho, these are the lizards you probably are gonna see. Sagebrush lizards, fence lizards, side blotch lizards, these are all kind of in this group right here. Anything else? Basilisks are fantastic. So iguanas are a good example of like a big lizard. And so when a lizard gets big, there's usually only a couple ways it goes. All the big iguanas are herbivores. They eat leaves. They have big guts for digesting plant matter. We're going to talk about that when we get into diet later in the quarter. Basilisks are pretty close relative to them. Basilisks are like kind of jokingly called Jesus Christ lizards. They're in Central America and South America because they can run on water. They have really big feet and they move really quickly. So they walk on water to get away from predators. They also have these awesome display structures down their back that they can raise up to like look big. Chameleons, hyper specialized tree lizards. They've got like hands that are fused into like this kind of thing with 2 fingers and 3 fingers on different sides. I can't do it because I have monkey hands, but like doing a chameleon thing, their eyes move independently. As I'm sure you know, they have tongues on a piston that can shoot out really, really far. The absolute smallest amniotes ever are, as far as we know, chameleons. There's chameleons in Madagascar that are less than 1 inch long adult body size, which is a nightmare. I don't like imagining being that small and being a vertebrate, let alone an amniote. I think it's really scary. All right, so there's a lot of iguanians, a lot of cool diversity, a lot of familiar lizards, Idaho, and the iguanians. Next up is the anguimorphs.
That's so low word. What a name.
All right, what kind of anguimorph things do we notice that you're talking about?
Are the earless ones deaf? Is that what it's referring to?
They don't have an external ear. I don't actually know if they're deaf or not, but like they don't have an actual opening. Like a lot of lizards have their hearing back at the back of their head as a little open space. But they do not have that same external structure. I don't think they're deaf, but I don't know. Monitors are probably another group of extremely famous lizards. The Komodo dragon is a monitor lizard. These are lizards today of Africa, Southern Asia, and Australia for the most part. They used to be more widespread. There's some extremely awesome early monitor fossils from 50 million years ago in Wyoming. You guys know like the Fossil Lake in southeastern Wyoming, southwestern Wyoming, like near Kemmerer. There's some awesome early monitors from Wyoming, but those are very old. We don't have them anymore here. We do have on this continent Gila monsters, which are a venomous lizard. They are vertebrate specialists and they eat a lot of eggs too. So they catch like mice and things like that. They're also called the beaded lizards because they have this awesome skin. There's a few species of them. You guys maybe have heard of the Gila monster before down in like Arizona, New Mexico, Texas. Again, multiple members of the clade have lost their legs. You guys want to know something fun? 88 times at least squamates have lost their legs. That's how many times they've lost their legs. There's two kind of there's two kind of complementary reasons we see different body plans, but it's something that's not hard to do if you're a squamate. Losing your legs happens a lot in squamate evolution. Maybe we'll talk about it later. So we just moved through the lizards. You guys see some geckos, some skinks. You can see that the iguanians and the anguimorphs have an ancestor with each other. That's just true. Now we're going up to this thing. Here's one single example of leg loss that we call snakes. But a lot of other squamates have done it. None of those groups are near as diverse as this time that one group lost their legs. And this one's called Serpentes. I hope that one's an easy one for you to remember. The serpents, there are more than 3,600 species of snake in the world. Let's talk about snakes. I've got some features for you. 3 synapomorphies, 3 shared derived characters I'd like you guys to have for Serpentes, for the snakes within Squamata, within Lepidosauria, within Reptilia. Don't laugh, but I couldn't resist. Extreme skull mobility. instead of giving you a bunch of different characters for how their maxilla, their palatal bones, their quadrate, their lower jaws, which have the dentary at the front, are all very loose. You can see they do not have like a connection that's bony between their lower jaws. Their maxillae move independent of the palatal bones, which also move independent. That jaw joint bone swings all the way back. The jaw joint itself is very open. Snakes' skulls can basically come apart. They have extreme skull mobility. So here's a rattlesnake, and there's a python, mouthful of teeth, lots and lots and lots of movement in the snake's skull. You can think about it, they do not have anything else to do anything with. So their faces are extremely derived. Also for prey capture and prey holding, because they don't have anything else they could possibly do, they have angled teeth. All snakes have teeth that are like pointing towards their throats. So when they get you in your mouth, they can get you back down. And so I hope you can see, like, there's the brain case up there, and then look at this like architecture swooping around the temporal fenestra of this big boa. So it's all space for jaw muscles, all space for there to be big movement. So the angled teeth, angled backwards in a snake, also that extreme skull mobility. And the other thing that they have that is unique to them, not all the limbless lizards do anything like this. Snakes took it to an extreme. They've lost a lot of paired organs, or they stagger them in the body. So snakes are bilaterians, of course, because they're animals and they're vertebrates and all that. Because they're chordates and they're vertebrates and all that. But they've taken some of the elements that you have in your body that are paired and done weird things with them. So we'll look at a snake later in lab. But for instance, this is the left lung, and this is the right lung. So one of them is actually functional, the other one is greatly reduced. The same is true for, like, here's the two testes. They're both totally useful, but they're not next to each other. They're like this in their two bodies. And the same thing is true for their kidneys. Those two hot dog looking things are the kidneys that are offset from each other. They're not next to each other. There's not enough space. They're like this. So the loss of the staggering of paired organs is absolutely very cool snake thing. The heart is the heart, the trachea is the trachea, but if it's a pair, it's like that. Something that's really interesting, the cloaca, that's where the digestive system ends. That's like where defecation would happen, reproduction happens. Almost all snakes have extremely short tails. Tails being the part of their vertebral column that is past their post-anal tail, right? The actual tail is very short in most snakes. Some of the lizards we saw that are legless have really long tails. So they have like a lizard body and then like a 1.5 feet of tail. Snakes never have that. They always have very short tails. So it is their body that is long in a snake. Are you ready for the sister to all other snakes? These are called blind snakes or thread snakes. They're also called flower pot snakes because, like, when we import flowers from like other parts of the world, from tropical places, sometimes like in the dirt, there are these things. So they're called flower pot snakes. A lot of these guys are termite specialists. So they go and they live inside a termite mound with their really tiny, almost nothing eyeballs. And they're really small mouths with no teeth in them. And they just like grab little termites one at a time to eat them up. So you can see they're not very big. Something that is very, very, very cool that I encourage any of you to look into if you want to. I don't think I'm going to come back to it in class too much. We actually think that snake origins come from a burrowing animal like this, and that all the other snakes that you haven't seen yet, cobras, rattlesnake, everything, they have very weird eyes that are not like the eyes of all the lizards you've already seen. And so some of the features of the snake eye seem to be like re-evolutions of things that all the rest of us seeing vertebrates take for granted, because snakes have a part of their history, this burrowing ancestry. So all those legless lizards, their face, their eyes are just lizard heads, but snakes are very weird. Snakes they don't have any eyelids, right? You guys probably seen when a snake sheds, like the skin just comes off the eye. So all snakes after this one, look into it. If you're interested, look into it. I don't have time to get into it too much, but it's very, very, very cool. The fossil record also is like helpful for like, that might be the idea. All right, we're doing all right. We'll get through some snakes. All right, so let's talk about the different snake groups. Great name. Boo idea. Has anybody seen a rubber boa in Idaho? That one I've seen. They look like big worms. They're maybe like this. Very cool. So if you go hiking at like City Creek in town, you'll see rubber boas. If you go in the spring or the fall, when it's a little wet on the trail, rubber boas. So we do have a boa in Idaho. So boas are famously like constricting snakes. They don't have venom or anything like that. These are snakes that like wrap around prey, suffocate it, swallow it whole. These are the ones that are most famous for like eating an antelope and then sitting there for 9 months because they don't have to eat for a while. So anacondas and boas are all New World. These are only like Central South American. Obviously, we have boas in Idaho. Anacondas are water snakes. They live in like rivers and wetlands. Pythons are the big constrictors of Africa and Asia. So pythons are their own thing, but they are related to the boas of the New World. So you can think about it like that. Lots of tree boas in South America and lots of things like them that are more related to pythons and things like India, Southeast Asia. Big constricting snakes, massive snakes. The biggest snakes of all time from the fossil record are all boas. Big snakes, usually boas. So now we're just like kind of moving up the snake tree. So you saw the burrowers, here's the boas. The next tick up the tree are vipers. Talk to each other about vipers. What? I do.
I love this is all library, just private libraries, but. Oh, they're. They look kind of funky. But that might be like, it's a specific.
All right, what are some things, do people know anything about vipers? I'm sure you guys have experienced vipers in your real life before. Never? You've never had a, oh, okay. So rattlesnakes, of course, are vipers, and rattlesnakes are the ones that we have here in our state. We have rattlesnakes. There are lots of different kinds of vipers, though. All over the world, vipers are very diverse. In the eastern US, there's a lot of non-rattlesnake vipers, cottonmouths, water moccasins, things like that. Those are venomous snakes. These are all venomous snakes. Vipers famously have paired fangs that they inject. They stab their prey deep with these long fangs that are themselves basically needles. They are long tubes inside the fang for them to deliver venom. It's called envenomation. Most of the venom that vipers have is, oh my gosh, proteolytic. So it digests protein kind of on the spot. So they inject their prey with the venom so that they start to dissolve on the inside. And then of course, once they swallow them, their digestive stuff in their stomach starts from the outside. So that's how they process their prey. Pretty fantastic. Also, of course, that venom does have some levels of like paralysis for smaller animals. People don't love that. Most all vipers are non-lethal to humans. It hurts. Don't get bit by one, but it's unlikely that you will die from a viper bite. Even some of the big ones, like these adders. Adders are big African and Asian snakes, very thick. They're like the girthiest snakes. They can be like this long, but this big around. Huge heads. They are designed to be in the leaf litter. Obviously, they're sitting there at the bottom of the forest. You cannot see this snake. When I go, my field work is in Africa, so I'm always very aware of a lot of the snakes we have to deal with because it's a nightmare to imagine getting bit because we're very far from people. And one time I sent an email to people who were coming with us for the first time, and I said, here's all the snakes that are there, but where we've never seen one. Then one of my colleagues was like, send me a picture of like one of the fossil sites we were working, and it was like an adder draped. No one told me. So they're around. Most of these snakes are ambush predators. They sit still and they wait for you to get close. Not you, but like a mouse or a lizard. They wait for their prey to get close. if you guys want to Google like cottonmouths or water moccasins and people who are kayaking, because a lot of these snakes are very comfortable in water, like Louisiana, Florida kind of stuff. And it's great because they just curl themselves into a little donut, like they hold on to their own tail and they just follow it to go with the river. So there's videos you watch people kayaking and they're like, what? And like a huge water moccasin, like just like comes by as its own tube. It's very funny. Anyway, lots of tree vipers, lots of desert vipers, very cool. The snakes you actually probably should be a little bit like, about, I don't think are vipers, I think they're elapoids. Here are the elapoids. We're gonna talk to each other about elapoids.
Yeah. They're shaped differently than like water snakes. They also bring different patterns on the snake. Inline patterns.
Anything people know about these snakes? We're talking about, what are you guys talking about? If you don't know, what are you observing?
Sea snakes look very different to like inland water snakes.
Oh, absolutely. So sea snakes are a kind of cobra that has evolved to live out in the ocean. Some sea snakes like almost never come onto land. And even the back part of their tail has become like compressed laterally. They have like a fin almost. Very cool. What are some facts you might assume about these snakes you don't even know?
You don't want to get bit.
These are not all venomous. There's a ton of elapoids that are kind of like your normal snakes. But yes, they all have pretty intense venom. These are the snakes that are very, very, very dangerous, even to large mammals like humans. Cobras, mambas, very much so. Things like taipans, a lot of the diversity of snakes in Australia, just because of biogeography, are in this group. That's why Australia has the worst snakes and all that. It's because most of their default snakes, the little ones, the big ones, the tree ones, the desert ones, are just kinds of cobra. That's not true in North America. North America, we have a couple, like coral snakes, but their teeth are very far back in their mouth. So like even a coral snake can't really get its teeth into you. Not that it would want to, but even if it did, this isn't particularly dangerous, but you still, don't mess with a snake that's like bright red. I hope I don't have to tell you. We'll talk about that later. Cobras are, of course, the famous scary snakes, have the hood to intimidate you. Obviously, the rattlesnake's rattle, so that's a viper. The cobra's hood, that's your cue to like give them space. They're trying to tell you, don't deal with me. They're not trying to like, look how spooky I am. They're trying to like warn you away. I think those scariest snakes in the world are things like mambas. So that's a black mamba. So called for black mamba because its mouth is black. Now the snake itself is like an olive green and olive brown. You can't really see it when it's in the bushes, but its mouth is jet black. So these are very scary tree snakes. That is a snake that kills a lot of people every year, just by accident usually. You grab the wrong branch, you run into the wrong snake. Mambas are, I think, very scary. I will give that the scary seal of approval, mambas. Okay, we're almost done here. Here's the last group of snakes. Please remember, there's 3,600 snake species. 2,200 of them, 2/3, are in this next slide. And almost all of our Idaho snakes are colubroids, colubers. So there's a bunch of Idaho snakes and then some other fun ones. So you guys may have seen some of these racers go. I've seen gopher snakes on this campus a bunch of times. Garter snakes, but colubroids, like I said, most snakes are colubroids. So these are, for the most part, non-venomous, eating bugs, eating small animals. I will say this, fun fact for your notes, I guess, there are no snakes that are not carnivores. There's no herbivorous snake. All snakes eat other animals. There are gliding snakes. There are lots and lots and lots of tree specialist colubroids that have like very long, very thin bodies, very big eyes. They're able to hang out in the very tips of branches in the tropics and forests all over the world. That's a great example of an Asian snake. That snake, when it is laying down, is bright green and blends in with all the grass and you cannot see it. But then when it wants to, it just goes like this and all the scales go like that. And then it's black and white checker. So that's a threat display from that vine snake. Super, very cool. Love it. Anybody have any snake stories? We're almost done, so. You guys are Idaho people, and there's plenty of these around. I see more snakes than lizards when I go walk around. Yeah.
So I have never gotten bitten by an alive garter snake before, but in my
Okay, accurate.
stupidity, I have actually punctured myself on the teeth of a dead garter snake.
That's pretty funny. I feel like the snake can't be good.
Yeah. And I have caught a lot of snakes also.
Yeah, I think snakes are pretty great. Most of the snakes around here, don't touch the rattler, are fine. But of course, the gopher snake we have here in Idaho, its whole vibe is to look exactly like a rattler, so you won't mess with it. And the gopher snakes, if you guys don't know, if you see one, you might actually experience this. I've only seen it in the wild once, where a gopher snake will like stick its tail into leaves and grass. And if you come close to it, it'll just like shake its tail and make the grass go like shh. It does not really sound like a rattle, but it's trying to be like, nope, nope, nope. And you're like, you are not a rattlesnake, and you can pick it up, but don't pick it up. All right. I'm aware of the time. I'm happy to keep chatting. We will move to the right-hand side of the reptile tree on Thursday. I think we can do it. Turtles, crocs, and birds. I will see you then. Thanks, everybody on Zoom.